welcome to my podcast on real relationships. My name is Cynthia Spillman and I am a relationship expert, international speaker and best-selling author of a book, Your Other Half. I decided to start this podcast because, in my opinion, relationships are currently not being portrayed as what they really are. Whether you're watching the news, TV or social media, the perception given to people is wrong. And my aim is to talk about what happens in the real world, talk about real stories and listen to what real people think, do or go through, as opposed to creating expectations of something that doesn't actually exist. I may not agree with everything that is said by my guest, but it is their chance to express their opinions and their stories. And here today we have Cynthia Spillman, and we're going to talk about finding love later in life. Hi, Cynthia.
Hi, thank you for having me.
No worries at all. So tell us a little bit about yourself, please.
So I am nearly 64 and I was born and brought up in Glasgow, French mother, Russian Jewish father. I was married the first time when I was 19.
Yeah.
I was married the second time when I was 38.
Yeah.
And I was married the third time when I was 48 to the man who is the love of my life.
Fair enough. So let's start with the first marriage then.
Yes.
How did that come about? Was it love at first sight?
Oh, it was
another story, not.
Definitely not love at first sight. I was living in a sort of little town outside of Glasgow, and I met somebody, a man who was 12 years older than me, who lived around the corner from me, still lived with his mother, which is, was a really bad sign because he was 30 when I met him. And my parents put huge pressure on me to marry him. And I was very afraid of my parents. My parents were very...
Why did they do that?
Because my mother had been married the first time at 18. My father was a misogynist and used to say that I wasn't academic and that, I wanted to study law. And he used to say, oh, you wouldn't like it. He was a judge. Women make bad lawyers. Just do a secretarial course. Now, I was a lousy secretary, lousy at it. I was academic. And, the proof is that when I was 30, I got myself into Cambridge the year after my son died and my daughter was badly disfigured and did a law degree. So I was pushed into this marriage with somebody I really didn't want to marry. And my mother used to say, oh, if you don't marry him, nobody else will ever have you. Well, I've been married twice. And there was just nothing between me. And there was no spark for me. And I had planned to go and live in Nice with my mother's sister, who I adored. And when I got back to Dover, my parents had brought this guy down and had... I said, oh, I don't want to marry him. Well, we've announced the engagement. That's how bad it was. And that was 1977, not the dark ages. And I didn't want to go ahead with it. And my parents said, what will people think? What will the neighbors think? It was a nightmare.
Yeah, it's only 45 years ago. It sounds bad, doesn't it?
I know, and I couldn't stand up to them. And my aunt, my beloved aunt, tried to stand up to them. And there was a big falling out. And my brothers were furious. They felt very protective. And it was a complete disaster from day one. When I look at my wedding photographs, I looked miserable, and I was miserable.
Yeah. So how long did that last for?
Well, he had a spending problem, just like my mother. And our homes were repossessed multiple times. And we changed city twice. And I had 2 kids by him by the time I was 23. It lasted 12 or 13 years,
right.
But I wanted out the whole time. And it was the death of my son in a car accident in 1987 that was the catalyst.
Yeah.
My getting out, because I couldn't take it anymore.
Yeah, completely. And so what happens next, so to speak?
So after my son died, I got into Cambridge to do a law degree. And in my second year there, just before my second year finals, I left my husband and I took £30,000 worth of debt with me that was his, which is an awful lot of money in 1991.
Yeah.
And my daughter and I, we went to live in a rented place in Cambridge. And I put my daughter, I nursed her through many major operations. And I got divorced. I think I got divorced in 1992.
So was there a big party?
Well, I will tell you what, I was really relieved, but I wasn't happy about having his debts. And he
Well, yeah,
never paid a
quite.
penny of maintenance. But I was free, and I realized that, that I wasn't this terrible person he made me out to be, and that I was popular and going to university. I had lots of younger men interested in me, and it was wonderful for my ego.
Yeah. But so how did you meet your second husband?
So I met him. Things had got very bad with me in the sort of mid 90s. I went into a depression, not surprisingly. I became addicted to Valium, and I was drinking too much. And I met my second husband on a blind date. I worked for a college in Cambridge, and he did some part-time work for them, and we met on the phone, so to speak, and we met on a blind date. And I was 38 at the time. On day one, I didn't like him. I thought he was awful. On day four, he popped the question, and I persuaded myself that he was going to be the knight on the white charger who was going to rescue me and take me to London.
That's a bit fast, 4 days.
It is insane.
Yeah.
It is insane. And it was, I thought, well, I'll be able to stop drinking, and I'll have this happy life. He was 10 years older than me.
It is again the typical, I want to be saved by someone,
Yes.
not by myself.
Yeah, it was the fix. So I talked myself into it. And I married him in August 97, stopped drinking the morning of my wedding, have never touched it since. Moved to London in March 98, and it was a complete disaster. Complete disaster. He had a penchant for men, and he was addicted to gay cyber sex, and I basically rumbled him and discovered what was going on. And so then I faced a really acrimonious divorce, and that was very hard. So I was only I married him in 97, and we got divorced in 2001, and we separated in 2000. So it was a very nasty divorce.
If it was, into gay relationships, why do you think he proposed to you? Was that his way out to, in brackets, pretend that is?
Yeah, I think so. I think so, because he never admitted this whole homosexual thing. And in fact, he remarried. He married for a third time. I was the second wife, and he married somebody in their 80s. So draw your own conclusions. But, I think that, maybe I was a cover. He wouldn't admit the problem. And it was a very painful time because I was new to sobriety as well. And it was very difficult. But sometimes the wrong roads lead to the right destinations, because we divorced in 2001, and in 2002 I met Peter, the man who was to become my third husband, and the man who really is the love of my life. So it was third time lucky.
I think that the thing as well with it, there's a number of things, isn't it? One is, obviously, if we go back through the last 100 years, people met very young, got married, whether it worked or not, to be fair, stayed together. There was no such thing as divorce. Then divorce started to happen. And it's only really recently that it's kind of classed as normal to be married 3 times to a degree. But society and everything else still kind of like, I don't know, the Disney movie, I suppose, kind of implies that you should meet someone at 20, and that there's something wrong with you if you don't.
Yeah, well, that's right. And it isn't like that. The blended family is the norm these days, not the traditional family.
So how did you meet Peter? And were you looking for someone at the time?
So I was 43 and he was 47. And the short version of the story was that I was invited to a surprise 40th birthday party in his house. He lived next door to a friend of mine. And at the time, he was divorcing his wife, but he was still living there. And I kept on hearing about this really nice man who had a wife who was drunk all the time and who had young kids. And it was all very traumatic. And it was so strange because the moment he opened the door, honestly, it sounds ridiculous, but it was like a thunderbolt. And I thought, oh, I fancy him. And, I always laugh because I had a certain type. And what I learned was that my type wasn't my type. I didn't do beards, I didn't do bald patches. He had a beard, well, he still has, and a bald patch, and just stupid things. And I knew the minute I met him that I'd finally met a man who was going to be a match for me on every level. And I'm not easy because I've had a lot of bad experiences. Uh, and who I thought he was the most interesting man I'd ever met in my life. And he asked to sit next to me at the table. There were about 40 people. And we got talking. And I knew that if I didn't do something, I would never see him again. And the next day, he was going on a 3-week charity trek to Nepal. So it was a high risk strategy because he was still living in the house with his wife, soon to be ex-wife, because of the difficulties with her and the kids. So I wrote him a letter, and I timed it for when he arrived back from Nepal.
Right.
And he emailed me and said, thank you very much. He could see straight through my email and he could tell that I was after him. And he said, let's go out for dinner. So we went out for dinner. And he then proceeded to tell me he didn't want to be in a serious relationship. So that was fun.
Yeah, so he didn't know straight away that you were the right person for him then?
No, because he'd just come out of a traumatic marriage. And what he always says, and he's very open about it, is that all he was interested in having was good, uncomplicated sex. And he'd met somebody that he was having that with. And I didn't know anything about this. So we were friends for a couple of months and nothing happened, despite my best attempts to seduce him.
Yeah.
And then one day he said to me, well, look, I didn't want a serious relationship, but I'm not going to be the latest in a long line of bastards who's going to use you.
Yeah.
Because he knew damn well I was after him. And he said, and I was seeing somebody because I wanted good, uncomplicated sex. I've told her that I've met somebody that I think I want to be serious about. She said, oh, you can continue to see both of us. He said, I don't operate that way. And I thought either this man is mad, because most men may not have told me. And a lot of men would have tried running us side by side. And I thought either this man is nuts or he's really moral. And it was that he was really moral. So we started off as friends, which I'd never done before. Best thing that ever happened to me. And after 2 months, we then, developed into a full relationship.
Yeah. And how long after that did you get married?
Oh, well, that was the other thing. We were together for 5 years before we got engaged. No, actually, hang on, I can't count. I met him in 2002, and we got married in 2007.
Right.
And because he did not want to get married again. One of the first things he said to me was he was never going to get married again because he'd made his vows, he'd meant them at the time, but his ex-wife was a chronic drunk and she never stayed sober. She never kept her, she kept on discharging herself from rehab. And so he was never going to get married again. And he nearly ran a mile when I told him on the first date that I decided to get married after 4 days.
So I was just about to go with that and mention it.
Yeah. So we were together. I moved in with him after 4 years. And then I gave him an ultimatum, which I never intended to stick to. And he popped the question and we got married 5 years later.
So obviously, marriage was important to you.
Yeah, well, I wanted the security. And on one level, it hadn't given me security twice before. But I wanted the security, and I thought, well, he married that terrible woman, and she tried to destroy him, tried to destroy his kids, and that his baggage has been the major problem in our 21 years together. And I just wanted it. I just wanted to get married again, and I knew he was the best thing that ever happened to me.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've either been proposed to or it's been discussed about 6 times.
Right.
And I've always said no.
Right.
Which a lot of people find a bit weird, but I think it's because for me, it isn't about that security.
Yeah.
But it is important to me. I don't think it's a deal breaker, but it is something that I would like to do.
Yeah.
Because I think, as you said, yeah, you say your vows and then, you know, you say them again and you can't promise that it's going to be forever when you've done it 4 times or whatever. But at the same time, I think that what people forget is that we mean it. It's just that circumstances of people sometimes change. It's not
Yeah.
always fault based, is it?
Yeah, and you know, I think I didn't have a clue the first 2 times what a real enduring marriage was. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
certainly my parents, it was a war zone. They, as I said, they hated each other for 57 years, and I didn't have any good role models. And you know, Peter has got a lot of baggage in that his ex-wife, even 21 years later, still tried to make trouble, and his children are adults now, but they're damaged. And it's been really hard for me, obviously very hard for him, but very hard for me to cope with it. And, you know, it's been an awful lot of work, and we've had to work on ourselves individually and as a couple. And
Mm-hmm.
we've had lots of professional help, and that's okay. We both believe that asking for help is a sign of strength and not weakness.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, we are gloriously happy now. All the external pressures that tried to destroy us failed, because even though at times it came close to destroying us, we always had a very strong bond, and we still do. And we're very different people,
Mm-hmm.
but we're extremely compatible, and it works. And, you know, I mean, together we've made both of all of our dreams come true, and it's extraordinary to have that.
Mm-hmm. So, what does pull you through in these challenging times?
Well, what pulled us through, you know, apart from getting help, but what pulled us through is that we've got a very honest relationship,
Yeah, that's
and
key, isn't it?
it's key. We communicate, and sometimes we have to communicate about things that we know the other one isn't going to like to hear.
Mm-hmm.
I think I've become far less inflammatory. You know, I think I've got better at managing my emotions, so I don't lose it like I used to.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, we communicate, and we very rarely argue now. I mean, it used to be terrible in the early days, but we very rarely argue. And if we do, we can step back and, you know, and apologize. Or what we have is so good and so precious that we don't want anything to destroy it. So we do the work. We do the work on ourselves, and we do the work as a couple. And we try and understand each other and give the other one space.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that's really important, and I see so often, is that in the hustle and bustle of life, regardless of you've got kids or grandkids to look after or just work, people stop talking about the details.
Yeah.
And really, it's the details that matter. That's when, because these little details can grow, and that's what
Yes.
becomes a problem, even just in the way that you've changed or that you're going a
Yes.
certain path.
Absolutely. And you know, as you say, communication is key, and being able to talk about difficult issues.
That as well.
Uh, and we don't always get it right, but we are good. We're much better than we used to be. And you know, we tend to sort of maybe like you know, we bring each other breakfast in bed, we take turns, and we'll sit and we'll talk. And then if it's going to be, you know, something difficult, often we'll hold hands while we're talking about it, so that we keep the connection.
Yeah.
uh and and we all have, you know, we have both have strengths where the other one has weaknesses, so
Mm-hmm.
we look after each other. And I think that's brilliant. You know, to hell with emancipation, we look after each other.
Yeah.
And it's great to be with somebody who you can also have fun doing absolutely nothing with, if you
Yeah.
know what
Yeah.
I mean.
Yeah. And I think that's something that sometimes people forget. You know, I remember I was in a relationship, one before last, where I was sat on my own on the settee once, and he was playing on his computer in another room. And another time I was sat next to him on the settee, but I actually felt more alone than if
Yes.
I had been alone, if that makes sense.
That's the worst feeling in the world. I had that in my first marriage. You know, I used to drive round and round in the car rather than go home. I
Yeah.
absolutely understand that. That's a terrible feeling.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah.
And so to you, what would be tips apart from communication about having a successful marriage?
So, okay, so as the top is, as you say, is communication. I also think managing your expectations.
Yes, I
Boy, if
agree.
I find, if that is a real biggie that people don't talk about, because people have such unrealistic expectations. And when we own dinner dates, I used to see that all the time. I mean, you have to manage it. You're never going to get everything you're looking for in the other person, and you have to feel good about yourself. And I always say that finding love is an inside job. If you don't take care of yourself first, you are just going to go out there and repeat the same terrible patterns.
And I
And
think that in that, sorry, I interrupt, but
yeah,
and in many aspects of life, but it highlights even more so in a relationship, it's want versus need. And we don't
totally.
always know, like there's a rule in marketing, which is you say them what they want, but you give them what they need. And it's
Yes,
exactly the same, isn't it? We're looking for
yes,
something we think we want, but actually that doesn't work for us.
I totally agree with that. It's not often what you think you what you want is what you need. It isn't always that.
Yeah.
Just like my ridiculous beard and bald patches. I mean, I just laugh at that now. What
Yeah.
did I know? And it's also about being open, trying to be tolerant, trying to be patient. And I'm not Mother Teresa. I get it wrong sometimes, and sometimes motor mouth disengages from my brain, and I
Yeah.
come out with things. But I know how to say sorry. And we we've had lots of adventures together, and we love being married. And ironically, after on our wedding day, after Peter saying he was never going to get married again, he said, oh, I really like this, I really like that. I thought, well, you put me through all that for 5 years saying you were never going to get married again, but we really like it, and we're very happy together. Um, and neither of us is perfect. At the beginning, well, apart from all the bad stuff that was going on, really bad stuff, we had to get an injunction against his ex-wife for breaking into our house and ransacking. It was terrible. But I used to feel it took me years to stop unconsciously sabotaging the relationship because I didn't feel I was worthy of the love of a good man. Now that comes from my childhood,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and I would unconsciously sabotage it. It was as if it wasn't bad enough that we were getting external stuff going on. I would sabotage it. And that's terrible. That's sad.
I know, but I think when people do that, it's often because they want to be re-chosen despite all their flaws, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So that was very painful when I realized I was doing that. We just think we're so fortunate, and often we'll just say, "Aren't we lucky?" Because so many people aren't so lucky, but
But
then
is
they
it
have.
luck though? I'll
Yeah,
give you
you make your luck. You
yeah,
make it.
because so years ago when I used to work in security, one day I went to the head office and some girl who was about 25 or whatever at the time, I just got married, or recently got married. And I said to her, so, how's it changed, sort of thing? Has it changed anything in your life? Or is it literally a
Yes.
bit of paper? And she said, I know it's fine now, I can relax. I'm safe. And I was like, oh my God.
Oh,
Oh my God. And I didn't know any of the stuff I do now, but I thought
yeah.
that is the writing on the wall.
Yeah, yeah, you're never safe, and you never take your partner for granted. I'm
Yeah.
sure I do. I'm sure he does too at times. But you never, should give up making an effort
And you should
because you're
reignite that
doomed.
fire every now and again, not just leave it being routine all the time, aren't you?
Yes, yes, and do things like have date night. I mean, do intimate things, and not necessarily
Sex, yeah.
sexual,
But
but it's great.
intimacy.
It's great still having good sex when you've been
Yeah, yeah.
together a long time. But that comes also from being, that
Close.
doesn't come just because uh, you've been together a long time. It comes because you speak to each other, you communicate, and talking about sex, like we get taken aback when we meet people who say, "Oh, if we sleep in separate rooms," or "Oh, well, I'm glad I don't have to do that anymore." And we just think, well, we still have a good sex life. What? Why should it be embarrassing, or why should people think that it's okay? And then what I think, well, there isn't a person who couldn't be led astray under the right circumstances.
I think that the thing with the sex, it reinforces the bond every time.
It does.
And
It
it's when
does.
you don't have it, that's when, you know, think, because there's always going to be, it's often the woman, let's be realistic, who
Yeah.
no longer wants sex, or then
Yeah.
there's with erectile dysfunction with a man after a certain age.
Yeah.
But it's that, again, talking about it, because otherwise the other one can feel like, oh, they don't want me anymore then.
Well, yeah. And, you know, for women, we've got the menopause.
Yeah.
I mean, I had the menopause from hell and it destroyed my bladder, you know, the whole thing with pelvic spasm, all of that. And your hormones all over the place. It's not great for your sex life, but with good communication, you can get around that and get over that. And it does, you know, and I feel sad that people think they should stop having sex or sleeping in the same bed as their partner after a certain number of years. I mean, even if you're not having sex, you know, to be in the bed with your partner is intimate.
Yeah, totally. And at the same time, I do understand that, you know, people snore, especially as we get older.
Yeah.
And stuff.
Yeah.
I'm sure they snored when you met them. You know, it doesn't just get really bad overnight.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, you've got to put the work in and communicate on every level and manage your expectations. And, you know, our bodies change. We don't look the same as we did 20 years ago, but still make an effort.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that you touched on earlier is having that freedom. I think it's important to be kind of attached at the hip, but it's equally important to have separate interests and do separate things, because
Yes.
otherwise, what do you talk about?
Well, that's right. Well, you know, for example, Peter is a passionate skier. I tried skiing with him, going on skiing holidays with him and his kids twice. I could ski. I learned to ski easily because I used to be a good ice dancer, but I get vertigo. So after the second holiday, I couldn't go anymore. And, you know, he still wants to go skiing once a year. Now, I'm anxious about it. And this is always a throwback to my car accident. Bad things happen to the people I love. But I know I have to let him go because it's his passion and there's nothing I can do about it. And, you know, he likes lots of activity that I don't like. Well, I can't stop him doing that. He has to live his life. It would be the kiss of death if I tried to control him.
And I think this is another thing that's an issue in marriages a lot of the time. They try, often the woman, again, unfortunately, but it can be the man, tries to control the partner.
Yeah, and you know, when he was 64, he climbed Kilimanjaro 6 weeks after a hernia operation in the worst ever conditions on the mountain. People died, and you know, I was in London for 10 days and no communication. There was nothing I could do about it.
Yeah.
I had to accept that if something happened to him, it happened to him while he was doing what he wanted to do. And I've got a lot better because in our early years, you know, if you went skiing, oh my God, it was like the Last Supper the night before. I'd be in tears and I'm better at managing my own anxiety because after all, one of the things that attracted me to him and still attracts me to him is he's dynamic, he's passionate,
and he's different.
You know, he's an adventurer.
Yeah.
And I like that. So I can't try and stop him.
No. So as we're getting towards the end of our time together, if someone was listening to this and actually struggling in their marriage, what would you say to them?
I would say to them to, you know, to consider all the good points and all the bad points. And in fact, I'm a great believer in writing things down. So make a list of the pros and cons and decide, you know, is this what you want to stick with for the rest of your life? Because life is too short.
And some of the bad points, can they be tweaked into a good point?
Yeah, yes. And, you know, communicate. Don't just give up. Because, you know, as you know, it's harder to meet somebody as you get older. You're never going to find the perfect person. Manage your expectations. Obviously, if you're being abused or whatever, that's a whole thing. Get out. But, you know, just because you might be a bit bored or think, you know, the grass is greener on the other side, sometimes the grass is fake.
Yeah.
You know, and communicate, get help.
It is the expectations as well, you know, just because you see someone across the road or on Facebook showing as if it's all perfect. I mean, in fact, I've been asked to write a blog about this because someone has noticed two couples who look like a perfect couple on the surface have actually split up.
Yeah, you know, you never know what goes on behind closed doors.
Exactly.
Yes.
Right, Cynthia, thank you so much for sharing all of this again.
You're welcome.
And
Thank you for asking me.
no worries at all. And for everybody else, if you enjoyed the show, then please subscribe, give us a review, and more importantly, come back for the next episode. Thank you.